You came home from school and let yourself in. No one was there. You made your own snack, turned on the TV, and figured it out. You were 8 years old. That wasn't a crisis. That was Tuesday. For millions of kids born between 1965 and 1980, the empty house wasn't unusual. It was just the schedule. The key around your neck wasn't just metal. It was the beginning of a belief system. I don't need anyone. I handle things myself. I figure it out. Most people describe Gen X as the independent generation, the tough ones, the ones who didn't complain, didn't ask for much, and didn't make it anyone else's problem. That's accurate. But it's not the whole picture. You didn't come out of that era independent because independence was your personality. You came out independent because dependence wasn't available. Here's what actually happened. When a child learns repeatedly and reliably that they are the one responsible for their own comfort, their own safety, their own emotional state, the nervous system adapts. It doesn't adapt slowly, it adapts completely. That's not damage. That's neuroplasticity doing exactly what it was designed to do. The nervous system reads the environment and builds a response system calibrated to it. For Gen X, the environment said, adults are unavailable, institutions are unreliable, and self-sufficiency is the only currency that holds its value. So that's what the nervous system built. A fortress, functional, efficient, quietly sealed from the inside, and it worked. But here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. The nervous system doesn't know when an era is over. It keeps running the same program until something interrupts it. What that looks like in adult life is what we're going to look at now. Here are 3 signs you carry the Gen X psychological profile. Sign 1. You feel deeply uncomfortable asking for help. Not the surface kind. Directions, a quick favor, a work question. The real kind. Asking someone to show up for you when something is genuinely hard. Asking to be held. Asking to matter. That discomfort isn't a personality quirk. It's a nervous system that ran hundreds of thousands of repetitions of figure it out yourself before you were old enough to drive. The ask doesn't feel like an option. It feels like a risk. Because for most of your childhood, when you needed something from the adults around you, the need either went unmet or the adult on the other end was already overwhelmed. So you stopped surfacing the need, you became the person who needed nothing, asked for nothing, and managed everything. That's not weakness. That's a very efficient survival edit. Sign 2. You default to cynicism when things feel too good. Something goes well. A relationship deepens. A plan comes together, something actually works. And somewhere underneath the surface, a quiet voice says, "Don't trust this." It doesn't announce itself as fear. It just keeps you from leaning in all the way, 1 foot in, 1 foot ready to leave. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. You grew up watching things fall apart. Institutions, promises, adults who were supposed to be load-bearing. Cynicism was the tool that kept you from being blindsided when the next collapse came. It was accurate. It was protective. It was the correct response to the information you were given. It just hasn't updated its threat assessment in 30 years. Sign 3. You disconnect emotionally before you get close enough to get hurt. You go quiet, you get busy, you create distance without quite deciding to. And it usually happens at exactly the wrong moment, right when something is starting to feel important, right when someone is starting to matter. That's not avoidance in the passive sense. It's a highly calibrated, self-protective move your nervous system learned when it was managing more emotional complexity than any child should have to carry. You calibrated the proximity carefully, close enough to function, far enough to stay intact. You left before things could leave you. It worked every time. Root Section Summary Card. Root 1. The Latchkey Era. Root 2. Institutional Collapse. Root 3. The Invisible Generation. Now here's where it came from. Root 1. The Latchkey Era. Gen X was the first American generation in which large-scale, unsupervised childhood became the norm rather than the exception. Divorce rates doubled between 1960 and 1980. Dual-income households became the standard. The structures that previous generations took for granted, present parents, nearby extended family, stable neighborhoods, were restructuring in real time. So children restructured too. You learned to regulate your own emotions before anyone taught you how to do it. You managed your own boredom, absorbed your own fear, solved your own problems, all before your prefrontal cortex had finished developing. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that governs emotional regulation. It doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s. You were doing adult-level emotional work in a child's brain, and you did it without collapsing. Root 2. Institutional Collapse. Watergate. The tail end of Vietnam. The AIDS crisis, in which the government refused to name or address for years while people died. The Challenger explosion broadcast live in school classrooms across the country. Corporate layoffs, factory town closures, adults in suits explaining on the news why the structure everyone relied on had quietly failed. These weren't history lessons you studied later. They were the wallpaper of childhood. The message embedded in all of it was consistent. Adults lie, institutions fail, and trusting the official version will get you hurt. Gen X didn't become cynical because they were jaded. They became cynical because cynicism was the rational conclusion. You were right to stop trusting the structure. The structure stopped earning it. Root 3. The Invisible Generation. Gen X is sandwiched between the two largest, loudest generational cohorts in American history. The cultural conversation has always been about boomers or millennials. Gen X was too small to dominate marketing data, too old for the early internet revolution, too young for the post-war prosperity narrative. The overlooked middle. And just like the middle child in a family system, often independent, often low maintenance, often quietly managing themselves because everyone else is occupied, Gen X learned not to need the spotlight. That learned invisibility produced something specific: deep competence, radical self-containment, and a quiet, persistent discomfort with being fully seen. Principles Section, Summary Card. Principle 1. Your independence was a strategy. Principle 2. Your cynicism is grief in disguise. Principle 3. You get to receive care now. Here's what to do with all of that. Principle 1. Your hyperindependence was a strategy, not a character flaw. Say this clearly. You won the Latchkey era. You took one of the most psychologically demanding childhood environments of the 20th century and came out the other side functional, resourceful, and capable. That wasn't luck. That was an extraordinarily effective adaptation. The nervous system that learned to need no one? It did its job. It kept you safe when the people who were supposed to keep you safe weren't available. You carried that responsibility because you had to. And you carried it without collapsing. The reframe isn't that you were broken. The reframe is that the war is over. You survived the era when self-reliance was the only option available to you. You don't live there anymore. The survival skill is still running. But the threat it was calibrated for has been gone for decades. Outdated survival skills don't make you damaged. They make you someone whose nervous system is still protecting a version of you that no longer needs this much armor. You can put some of it down now. not because you were wrong to pick it up, because you're strong enough not to need it. Principle 2. Your cynicism is grief in disguise. Underneath every "I knew that wouldn't last" is a version of you that hoped it would. Cynicism is what the nervous system produces when optimism has been punished enough times. It's not a personality trait, it's emotional scar tissue. Scar tissue forms because something was injured. The cynicism means you cared. It still does. The question isn't whether to stop being realistic. Realism is a tool you've earned. The question is whether you can let yourself care again, knowing things might still fall apart and deciding it's worth the risk anyway. That's not naivete. That's the most psychologically sophisticated move available to you. It takes more strength to stay open after you've been closed than it ever took to close in the first place. Principle 3. The generation that survived without enough gets to receive care now. This is the hardest one. You became the person everyone else leans on, the competent one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make it anyone else's problem. But not needing much isn't the same as not deserving much. There's a difference between choosing independence and being unable to let anyone in. The nervous system that learned not to ask was protecting you. It still is. But that protection has a cost, and you've been paying it for a long time. Receiving care doesn't mean becoming dependent. It means updating the internal model that decided care wasn't safe. You proved you could survive without it. You don't have to keep proving it. The key around your neck wasn't a symbol of what was missing. It was proof of what you were already capable of. You figured it out at 8 years old with no instruction manual and no backup. You've been figuring it out ever since. The psychology of Gen X is not the psychology of a broken generation. It's the psychology of people who built an entire internal world without a blueprint, without a safety net, and without ever being asked if the weight was too much. You were never lost. You were handed the map too early and told to navigate alone. And you did. What's available now isn't rescue. It's rest. If this video described something you've been carrying for a long time, and if you've never quite had a name for it before, subscribe and stay. There's more here for you.